Hello there. Let's take a look at your markets news now. Markets in Asia were mostly weaker at the closing bell. Japan's Nikkei shares 0.9%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost 1.1%, and China's Shanghai index declined 0.3%. India's markets have extended losses at the close of trade. Taking a look at the markets in the U.S. now, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq notched record high losses as robust results from Google parent Alphabet fueled optimism about other heavyweight artificial intelligence stocks, while Tesla slumped after the electric vehicle maker's results disappointed investors. Tesla tumbled after CEO Elon Musk warned of a few rough quarters as the U.S. government cuts support for electric vehicle makers. The stock has fallen around 25% so far this year. The U.S.-Japan trade deal and recent signs of progress in talks with the European Union have also fueled Wall Street gains. The S&P 500 was a tad higher, up at 0.7%, while the Nasdaq composite gained 0.1%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.7%, and is sitting at 44,693.91 points. Looking at the all-share index back home, it's also currently down at 0.7%. It's sitting at 99,205. You remember that this week we saw the all-share index breaching that 100,000 mark, and the rand is sitting at 17 rand 73 to the dollar, at 20 rand 79 against the euro, and it is at 23 rand 87 to the pound. A look at our commodities. Gold is at $3,345 an ounce. Platinum is at $1,388 an ounce, while Brent crude oil is sitting at $69.29 per barrel. Patrick Matidi, the head of the multi-asset strategies at Aluwani Capital Partners, is our market analyst for today. Patrick, always a great pleasure speaking to you here on the markets on SABC News. Firstly, if you could just wrap up the week for you and what stood out for you this week in the markets.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I think the key highlight of the week is obviously the JSE hitting all-time highs, but not only all-time highs, but hitting that magical 100,000 point level for the first time in its 100-plus year history. So that came in the midst of all the uncertainties, both domestically and globally. Domestically also, which turned out to be a highlight, was the signing of the appropriation bill, where, as you may be aware, a few days leading up to that, there was concern that perhaps this could be one of the straws that eventually break the GNU. So far so good on the domestic front, but obviously looking forward, I think there are a few headwinds we need to be aware of.
Yeah. Let's perhaps get your views on that loan that has been approved by the AFDB to South Africa that's worth, 8.2 billion rand. They say it's for South Africa's infrastructure, governance and green growth program, and there are fears about these loans and whether they could be fueling more debt to GDP as it's already high. How do you see it?
Yeah, so this is one of these, it's the second loan that we're getting from the African Development Bank. As you rightly say, about $8 billion or $500 million. Indeed, it is earmarked for the green transition, so transitioning away from fossil fuel into greener source of energy. I think if you start to add, all of these, loans, yes, indeed, those concerns are not, unfounded, largely because we still need the underlying economy to be growing so that we can afford to repay those loans going forward. So far, this one is a 15-year loan. We've got a 2-year sort of a grace period. Should we get to that 15-year and we can't afford to pay it all back? And then also the cost of it, appears to be concessionary. But as I rightly said, when everything adds up, especially coming in an environment where our GDP outlook is not, encouraging, and therefore putting question marks in terms of affordability going forward.
Yeah, Patrick, one other story that we've been keeping an eye on is the Reserve Bank and the IBEX Group, also known as the Standoff International previously. They've finally settled the long-running dispute of that 6.3 billion forfeiture to the cent. To what extent can we say this reinforces South Africa's reputation as a robust financial market?
Yeah, I think on that front, I think we still have question marks, largely because, if you look at the severity and the scale, of this financial fraud, if you call it that, not that many people have been held to account. Maybe a handful of people have actually been sitting in jail, but clearly the main actor behind it all, the former CEO, unfortunately passed away, before he could be held to account. And then most importantly, those who actually suffered the losses have yet to get any remediation or any recompensation, in the form of those losses. So I think it remains to be seen, the strength of our enforcement agencies. So far, I would say this settlement, sort of takes us a step closer, but it is coming through on the back of a very, very long, protracted period where, not much appeared to be happening. If you think back to when the first PwC report was, published, to date, very, very little progress has come through. But thankfully, hopefully we are now putting a sort of a line in the sand in terms of this ends now, and then putting this chapter behind us and hopefully moving forward with some of the victims actually getting some compensation in the form of some reparations.
Yeah. Perhaps let me use this last 2 minutes with you just to look at what's coming next week. We have all eyes on the MPC decision on interest rates, and there's already talk about, that we could expect 2 more interest rate cuts in this 2025 year period. Do you also see it the same way?
Yeah, I think there is scope to cut. If you look at where interest rates are, and also where inflation is, it is sort of around the 3% level, which is the sort of the new target that the MPC is focusing on. So we do have a lot of scope to cut, even if we are still sticking to the current 4.5 or 3 to 6% band. Given where inflation is, at around 3+, there's a lot of scope to cut. I think the MPC will probably err on the side of caution because the governor has since been quoted as being very worried about food inflation. So we do know that that can be very, very sticky. And then also, if energy prices start sticking up, that can feed into inflation very quickly. But the outlook, though, is still for a very benign inflation environment, just given the lack of growth domestically. And I think the other thing to watch out for next week is that this 1st of August, tariff sort of a kick-in date within ourselves in the US. So should there be nothing that gets agreed between now and then we can expect anything between 15 and 30% tariffs on some of our goods, which clearly won't be positive from a growth point of view.
All right. Patrick, thank you so much for always making time to speak to us here on the SABC News channel. Patrick Matidi is the head of the multi-asset strategies at Aluwani Capital, and he's been our market commentator for today.